All right, so here we go. Episode 2 of People Planet Podcasts with Fauna and Focus. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Daniel Roper Jones. I'm the project founder and director of Fauna and Focus. With us today, we also have Mr. Bram Walters, who's behind the camera.
Hello, guys.
And special guest for today is Katerina Velychko. Katerina is actually working for an organization called Sipar, and she's been working in Cambodia for about a year now. And so, thanks for coming, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm honored to be the second guest.
First guest who is not Fauna and Focus.
Right,
Yeah.
first outside guest in this
That's correct.
fantastic looking room.
Thank you so much.
Sound room.
So to give you guys a little bit of context about this podcast, essentially what People Planet Podcast is it's something new that we're trying for Cambodia. These are going to be both video and audio format. And generally we're going to be discussing environmental, wildlife, science, education, and conservation topics. But really, we really are just interested in like meeting interesting people and sharing different stories and learning what is happening when it comes to environmental and education sector work in Cambodia. And so we invited Katerina to join us today because her organization does a lot of work with rural communities regarding education, and they also are heavily reliant on using visual media to do that. And this is something that is very near and dear to us here at Fauna and Focus. And so we thought that we'd have a little chat about it and just share ideas and stories and talk about what works and what hasn't worked.
Fantastic, yeah.
Also, these podcasts eventually we'll be doing them in both English and Khmer. So this is still kind of we're in the early testing days. So do forgive us if the audio isn't like the best quality ever. We're still working out the kinks in this program. This is new for us.
I'm still learning Khmer.
And still learning
To
Khmer.
do them both in English and Khmer.
That's right. And this studio space that we've set up here at the Nature Center is also still a work in progress. So we might be able to improve the sound and the video and the lighting for future episodes. So with that out of the way, I guess we'll get started. And I guess firstly, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what is CPAR and what do you do for them?
Right, okay. Who am I? In the wider sense of the word?
However you wish to interpret it.
Alright, so I was born in Ukraine, hence the exotic name. Well done for getting it right. But I grew up in the UK, where I went through university. I moved to France, where I lived for 7 years, and that's when I came to Cambodia just after I got a little bit, I needed a little bit of a change. And I came to Cambodia 1 year ago. I started working for Sipar in Phnom Penh as a communication and fundraising officer.
2 jobs.
So, yeah, I mean, essentially it is 2 jobs. That's correct. Because you kind of have to be multitasking all the way through for
That
these
seems to
things.
be a story that I hear with
Right.
a lot of NGOs, is that people end up doing more than one job.
That's absolutely true. And in my case in particular, I have 2 assistants in my team, so we're a team of 3, but I'm the only one to be doing fundraising on top of communication. So what it really means and why those things go together is communication is all about establishing new partnerships. I mean, it's also about promoting your brand or your visibility, but also establishing new partnerships, donor relations, and following up those partnerships. So that includes a lot of donor reports and relations with your partners and your donors. Yeah.
And so, what do you, in terms of like your communications within Cambodia, is it mostly social media, or is it do you have like local partners as well that you're communicating with?
So actually, social media, what we find is that that's what works best in Cambodia. Definitely Facebook. Other means of social media are not quite as developed. Like Instagram is not quite here yet. Twitter is not quite here yet. So that's right. Most of our communication goes through our website, our Facebook, but we are partnering up with Lotus Radio, which you may or may not know.
I'm very unaware of a lot of things happening in Phnom Penh.
Right. Lotus Radio is a big radio like a production house, like a multimedia station.
Oh, cool.
And we do, for example, right now we're running a campaign with them So as schools are closed and children have spent 2 months out of schools and will probably spend more time without being able to go to school, as schools will probably reopen sometime around November. That's what the current estimations are. We've planned a campaign giving children access to audio and video books. So we're going to turn some of the books, so Sipar is a book publisher, we're going to turn some of those books that we have published in the previous years for younger audiences into audio and video.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Very
So
cool.
like filmed albums
Yeah.
that children can read and listen to depending on their ages and depending on their capacity
So cool.
to read.
Love that idea. So just tell me a little bit more about what is Sipar. So
Right, so we've been around since 1982. We were
1982.
1982. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
that's right. So we
In
were,
Cambodia.
No,
Oh.
in France,
Okay.
first of all. So we were founded in 1982 in France. And initially, Sipar actually was an acronym, a French acronym, which stood for, I won't bore you with the whole thing, but it was about soutien à l'initiative d'accueil pour les réfugiés sud-asiatiques. So that's, yeah, sure, go on.
You've got water in there.
Oh, I've got water.
I don't want to ruin
oh,
your
sure,
coffee.
I didn't see that. I thought the glass was
Coffee is here
half
when you're
empty.
ready for it.
Thanks. So at the beginning, we were all about helping the settlement of Southeast Asian refugees in France. So that's people from Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia.
From the camps.
From the camps,
Okay.
who were called, like at the beginning, they were well known as the boat people.
Mhm.
That's like in the 80s. And 10 years later, so we found ourselves actually going to Cambodia to teach French in the refugee camps on the Thai border for Cambodians, which were either going to go back to Cambodia after, obviously, the peace accords were signed in 1991, or for those who were going to get refugee status and go on to live in France.
Okay.
And from that moment on, that's how our work in Cambodia began. And that's how we got into education, that we collaborated with the Ministry of Education in Cambodia, who actually asked us to come and to provide a curriculum on library science, which was the first curriculum to exist in Cambodia for primary school teachers, on how to manage libraries and how to conduct, how to simply set up and have a library in your school.
Very cool.
And
So you guys have always kind of had a book focus
Exactly.
to your work.
Ever since we've come to Cambodia, we've been basically working around books. And funny story, at the beginning, I remember, I wasn't there, but I was told this story. So in the refugee camps, kids, they didn't have access to any Khmer books. There were literally no Khmer books at that moment because of the war, but also because there was never really a background or a history of Khmer literature in the first place, even before the Khmer Rouge was there. I mean, Khmer was always more of an oral language than a written language. And the first books that the kids had in their hands were...
And I imagine that there was a lot of lost writings during the Khmer Rouge period as well.
Absolutely.
So it's a bit like coming back to this school system and having to rebuild and restock the shelves.
Exactly, rebuild, but also just build simply because it was never that developed in the first place.
Okay, interesting.
And there was no children's literature as such. There was propaganda,
Okay.
sure. There was propaganda literature which existed for the purposes of promoting the
Sure.
Khmer Rouge and the regime in place. But children did not have books to read. So the first books that they did have in their hands, the kids from the refugee camps, were European and American, Anglophone books,
Sure.
which were translated by the means of writing the actual text in Khmer and sticking it on top of the words in the book with the original illustrations. So they were like flipping through these like makeshift
bits
albums.
of paper going flying out and you don't know.
Yeah. So, and from that moment on, we decided that we had to do something about that. And in 2000, we launched a publishing department. Today, we have printed, over 2.4 million copies.
Wow.
And 205 different titles, original titles, mostly for children's and young people's literature, but not only. We also have collections for adults, which mainly focus on life skills. So this is not fiction literature, this is more like documentation and practical guidebooks to help adults learn how to farm, financial literacy, family planning,
Very cool.
basic knowledge on health, etc.
Awesome. And so for Sipar, what does an average month look like? What kind of activities are you running on a kind of more monthly or weekly basis?
Sure. So we have quite a few programs going on at the same time. Our biggest program is the mobile library program. We have 10 vehicles. So that's 11 vehicles. Sorry, that's 10 vans, mobile library vans, and one motorbike library, which goes out to Ratanakiri because it's a really difficult to reach province
I
with
agree.
terrible roads. With terrible roads, so we have a mobile librarian fixed there who goes out to 12 villages and who stays there. And the rest of the libraries are in Phnom Penh.
So just that one motorcycle guy is dealing with 12 villages in Ratnakiri.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's his.
Maybe he can teach Bram how to drive his motorcycle.
Excuse me?
And give books to children. I think the motorcycle part is not his the main part of his job.
That's not the main part of his job. But if you're driving in those roads, it becomes a life skill for sure.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Bram is our newest staff member. He's been in Cambodia a few months now. He's just become the proud owner of a Honda Win, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So
120cc.
just enough.
And he's taking a crash course tomorrow, apparently, with
That's right.
for 2 hours about how to drive up Phnom Kulen.
Yeah, it's safety first.
Exciting times.
Wear a helmet.
Yes.
Safety first, wear a helmet. That reminds us of our road safety campaigns that we run every year as well.
So you do road safety in addition to everything else.
So that's the thing. We have a range of topics such as road safety environment, which is a big one.
I'm going to get to that.
Nutrition.
I'm definitely going to talk about that.
Nutrition, healthcare, yoga, and mindfulness.
Ooh.
Which the mobile libraries specialize in. So there'll be like one mobile library focusing on one topic, and STEAM. STEAM is also a big one. STEAM being science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. You know, the big new thing in education.
Yeah, that's new for me. The first time you said that to me, I was like, "What's STEAM?"
Ah, really? Okay.
And then you were like, "Yeah, no," and I was like, "Oh, STEM," and you were like, "No,
there you go.
Forgot
STEM,
about the arts."
yeah.
So it's great. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. Arts and science have a lot of overlap, especially in the education space. So.
Absolutely, yeah. But to go back to your original question, so a typical month for us is mobile libraries going. So we have one in Ratanakiri, sorry, and then the 10 vans based in Phnom Penh, and one in Siem Reap, which is where a possible collaboration with you guys may or may not.
That's a hint.
At play.
That's a hint for the future.
And they go out on a daily basis, visiting 2 villages per day, so one in the morning, one in the afternoon, bringing books, educational materials, tutoring sessions, and interactive games to children.
And so when these programs are being conducted, is it just one Sipar staff, like running everything,
it's
like leading the
3
program?
Sipar staff. So
3 staff
per van.
Okay.
Three. Sorry. So that's a librarian assistant, and a volunteer.
Okay.
We never leave, since this is about child welfare, and we never leave one adult alone with children. This is part of company
Good
policy.
child protection policy.
Exactly. So right now those mobile libraries are slowly restarting their activities after the 2-month break, which the whole of Cambodia has gone through due to COVID. The special thing is that we've evolved from going simply to villages. Now we're going to other places which are more specific, to target more specific populations, such as brick factories. I don't know if you've heard about I don't want to use the word scandal, but the extremely difficult situation that families living and working in brick factories are going through. So brick factories are obviously factories where they make bricks. The name is self-explanatory, but those populations are some of the most disadvantaged and disregarded and underserved populations, because they are literally living in these enclosed environments where kids are working to help their parents.
Sure.
The families are heavily in debt to the.
As a lot of families are, yeah.
Exactly.
Cambodia.
To the owners of the brick factories who are making them work.
Essentially indentured servitude.
Exactly, precisely. So,
and if we can even talk about the connection of brick factories to the environment, if you want.
Sure, go on.
Well, I think most people probably know this, but most bricks in Cambodia are wood fired, so they are produced
with wood
by burning wood.
Massive deforestation.
And huge amounts of deforestation come as a result of that. Nowadays, most of that is probably coming from the northern parts of Cambodia, but it really does depend on where the brick factory is.
Right.
The northern plains landscape is kind of vanishing because of demand for bricks. So all these new hotels going up and everything, and it's all bricks. But there's some interesting initiatives in Phnom Penh actually to do eco bricks.
Right.
So using bricks, they don't use any wood to production. They're sun baked. So
sun baked. Okay.
So they
instead of the fire stoves.
Yeah.
Okay.
and equally as strong. So
Really? Okay.
Mm. a
Amazing.
little bit more expensive, as is normal with sustainable alternatives in the early
Sure.
days.
Yeah, it's like coconut charcoal, something like that. They're trying
Sure,
to produce charcoal using coconut shells.
Mm.
What was it? I think it's the name is something like that. Coconut charcoal.
I don't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something like that.
Yeah, good initiatives.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about when you got to these communities, some in rural areas, some that are disenfranchised. What is your feeling about the connection between the communities and the natural environment? Because obviously at Fauna in Focus we're mostly focused on environmental issues and environmental topics.
Sure.
With a kind of our main focus obviously is on fauna, so wildlife.
Sure.
But as a result of that wildlife is connected directly to the wild habitats, which are part of ecosystems, which people are a part of. And the sustainability and environmental health of a region very often is tied to the economic health of a region.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, do you have any impressions or feelings about how these various communities feel about that connection between the dependency on their economies and their livelihoods versus the natural environment where they live?
Well, that's a very interesting question because it all kind of goes back to the lack of education. I feel like they are using their environment to extract what they need from it without realizing that they have to protect it in a way which will serve themselves and in a way which will close the cycle, so to speak.
So it's more sustainable.
Exactly.
Use.
I mean, I don't have a feeling, but then again, I'm not part of the field staff that communities are over abusing, like individual communities are abusing nature in itself, or they're not the ones who are behind massive forestation.
Sure. Well, for example, with your brick factory example, it's those communities that are employed by the brick factories are not necessarily to blame for the demand for bricks.
True.
So.
But I feel like that is coming more from the upper echelons, so companies,
Sure.
multinationals, or just big scale projects which are not really, well, you're right, that example excluded. This is not really the public that we're addressing our projects to. So people, the communities that we are visiting are mostly unaware of, I think, what's going on globally and what's going on in Cambodia in terms of climate change, in terms of natural resources being insufficient or not going to last for much longer. There's also definitely a complete lack of knowledge and understanding of Cambodian biodiversity. Kids have pretty much never seen or even heard of the vast majority of animals and plant species that exist in Cambodia. They will know their immediate nature, so like people living on the Tonle Sap will know what they need to know for survival, but there is absolutely no environmental education, which is why I think you guys are so important in this.
Thanks, I think we're important too.
Well, absolutely. There's absolutely no environmental education or understanding of why we should be striving to preserve wildlife and why Cambodian wildlife is unique. But this is because this is simply not taught in schools.
Sure.
And it's not part of any system. It's not part of a school system. It's not part of any kind of widely diffused public.
So agenda. I know that the Ministry of Education does have environmental components to their school curriculum, but if my understanding is correct, it's based off of a very, very old French curriculum. And when I say old, I mean like, from the 60s.
Right.
And so, we've worked in the education space here for a long time, and especially in the public school sector, in cities, but also even more often in remote areas. You're right. Even school teachers just don't have the fundamental training on Cambodian biodiversity to really be delivering, memorable and engaging education. And so what do you guys do? I know you guys have some nature themed books that you work on. Tell us a little bit about that.
So we have two components to our projects. The first, as you quite rightly said, is the publishing component. So we have indeed published some original works where we've gone and collected the data, but also we've bought rights to books foreign books, French books, Anglophone books. Is it still running?
I think so.
Alright.
Should be fine.
Which we have translated and which we have published in Khmer language. I think one of the books you have seen, the little copy on environment and biodiversity
Yeah,
in
I
Cambodia.
can see that.
So this collection is small, but it's essential, and we're using those books in the mobile library sessions that we're running on environment to teach kids about mainly biodiversity. Because the other component to that, and this is something which, as we all know, is hugely lacking in Cambodia, is waste management.
Sure.
And more than nature preservation, we're focusing on simply how do you as a community take care of your immediate environment by just not littering everywhere, by understanding that rubbish, most of it is non-biodegradable, and that it's if it's left there, it will pollute your immediate surroundings. So what we do during our mobile library sessions, we organize, so this, you have to imagine this is like a van with 50 kids, so we have to occupy 50 kids during, like young children, during 2 hours. So we do...
Always a challenge.
Always a challenge for 3 people, or 2 or 3 people. And mostly these games and sessions, so they start with a short movie projection, but a very simple film. I mean, nothing like you guys do, so none of that quality and none of that depth. Just a simple movie about waste management and conservation. In Khmer.
Okay,
In Khmer.
great.
Everything is done in Khmer.
I'm a big proponent of, if you're in Cambodia, you should be
Absolutely.
probably teaching and delivering programs in Khmer.
Oh yeah, we don't do anything in English at all.
This podcast is a special case. Normally we do everything in Khmer.
We've been talking Khmer outside of the camera.
It just won't be very good Khmer if we speak Khmer.
So we start with a short video projection, then we have a game, but a very simple one where kids get to classify like the good stuff from the bad stuff kind of thing, like what kind of world do they want to live in, you know, like a polluted beach or like a pristine waters and beautiful sands, those kinds of things. So very simple games.
Brom, could you just wiggle that mouse and make sure it's still recording before we continue?
Must be okay.
I'm sure it's fine, but let's just wiggle that mouse. Oh no, okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's still good. No problem. Fantastic. That's why we have you here, Brom. Yeah, it's fine. It's just, yeah, it's fine.
And our most important, I suppose, action is we actually get kids to go into the village and to collect the rubbish.
So you do like community cleanup events led by the kids.
Exactly,
Nice.
community cleanup events.
And then I have a big question for you.
Competitions.
I'm gonna throw you a challenge. What do you then do with the rubbish? Yeah, this is always the question.
I knew you would ask that question. I would love to tell you that we.
I don't know what the answer is. By the
no,
way.
exactly. There is no good
There's
answer.
no good answer to that question.
I think we collect it and we.
Consolidation has huge merits. Consolidation of waste has huge merits. So
even if it's non-biodegradable.
even if it's non-biodegradable, if there is no alternative solution, at least having it in one place has some merits.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I know plenty of people here that are working in waste management, and everybody is facing with the same challenges. You know, okay, do we bury it in a landfill? Then we have landfill problems. Do we burn it? Then we have air pollution and toxin problems. Are we separating out toxic waste from biodegradable waste, from regular waste, from plastic waste? Are we recycling? There's so many possibilities.
None of them are good.
None of them are perfect, and
yeah.
most of them are underdeveloped in Cambodia anyways.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like, even in the best case scenario, there's a limited amount of options for you to pursue when it comes to waste management.
I mean, the right answer to that is we don't produce it. Then again, that's not our
That is the right answer.
expertise.
That is
That's
the
the
right answer.
problem.
Is just reduce the waste in the first place by reducing consumption material
exactly,
waste and the
yeah,
packaging,
yeah.
Products.
It's all about the packaging. So actually, this is a small section of our activities. We educate families on the importance of having recyclable material. So when they go to the market, for example, they will have Tupperware boxes instead of getting plastic bags.
A plastic bag within a plastic bag within a plastic bag. Yeah.
Those
with a plastic fork and a plastic spoon and the rubber bands on top. Yeah.
Exactly. Or when you go to Amazon Coffee or whatever coffee you go to, and then you get a plastic cup
straw
with a plastic straw with a little piece of tissue wrapped around it, with a little thing to hold it to hang it on your motorbike, which is also made of plastic. That's the crazy stuff. So we teach families to.
I will say on that front, Siem Reap in particular. I actually don't know if Phnom Penh is like this, but the kind of public campaign against plastic just like took off a few years ago in Siem Reap. And I, a year ago, went home to New York, which is my home, and I was shocked by the amount of plastic waste. When I went, even when I went to my own house and I opened the, refrigerator, and everything is just in a plastic container and a plastic bag, and every single food item comes in a plastic thing. And I literally went, oh wow, Siem Reap is
Cleaner.
doing better than New York
York.
City is.
Wow.
Just in terms of like the public's perception, like all over Siem Reap now, when you order takeaway food, even it comes in a paper box that is biodegradable.
Right.
Okay, that comes with its own set of problems. Everything comes with its own set of problems, but it's at least a step in the right direction.
That particular problem.
And now there's like these bags that are made out of plant products. People are kind of going back to the banana leaf to wrap up food, which I love. So I really think that Siem Reap it's certainly not perfect, and with the amount of tourists that we get here and the amount of single-use plastic bottles that we get, it's still a huge problem. However, just from a kind of perception, I mean, like the level of awareness and the number of businesses that have gone like no single-use plastic or plastic-free, compared to even my own city where I grew up, it's night and day. So it's I mean, obviously the scale is much smaller here than New York City, but it's still significant. So anyway, just a little interesting comment there.
In Phnom Penh, there is certainly a culture of that, but I wouldn't be able to say how widespread it is. I mean, restaurants
I also
choose
don't
to
know how
do
widespread it is. It
to
just
do
has
it,
this.
yeah.
I feel like it's catching on.
Sure.
It seems that more and more of the places that I go, there's some
But
push
then
to go plastic free.
Siem Reap is more hipster.
Siem Reap is pretty hipster, I gotta say.
Phnom Penh is still a mainstream metropole, so you get all kinds of quirks and
Yeah, you'll get there. You'll get there in the
cultural
end.
mixes. Yeah, I'm sure we will, if I'm still there.
Cool. So maybe just to have a little bit of fun, just tell us about like your most memorable experience in Cambodia so far. Like, what's been the most exciting thing that you've had the chance to do?
Oh my god. Oh, there's so many.
You gotta pick one.
The most memorable experience, can I be really cliche and say swimming with the elephants in Mondulkiri? Or is that completely against the policy?
Swimming with the elephants in Mondulkiri. Interesting.
Thank God I didn't say riding elephants in Siem Reap,
You
because
did
then
not say
I would have
riding
been out of
elephants.
that door
That's right. Vanished.
before I could say goodbye.
Let me tell you something. Without naming names, a very close family member of mine, all they wanted to do was ride the elephants at Angkor Wat. That was, I mean, for years they expressed this interest.
And this is why you founded the center, to prove
No, I didn't. That's not the reason why I founded the center. But again, for me, if you don't know any better, how are you supposed to be, held responsible for your actions or your choices?
This is why we educate.
This is why education is literally the key to everything. And so when I provided my family members some information about how these elephants are made, it changed their mind, because they realized that indirectly they are supporting this horrible
Trade.
industry.
Yeah.
And to be clear, if you're not aware, there is no such thing as a domestic elephant. Anybody that ever tells you there's a domestic elephant doesn't understand what the word domestication means. So domestication is a process through selective breeding by humans, where you genetically select for tame traits in a wild species. Depending on the species, this can take hundreds of generations. Human beings have done this with plants. We've done this with grains that we've used to make bread, barley, wheat. We've also done this with animals. The classic example is dog, but we've also done it with chickens, with cows, and with pigs. These are domestic animals. They have been genetically bred to coexist with humans for our needs. This has never happened with elephants. This is a fallacy that this has happened with elephants. It's never happened. What's happened with elephants is called habituation or taming. And when you're dealing with a wild elephant, there's only one way to do that, and you have to break the elephant's spirit. And so this can be done mostly through, in Thailand, it's a process called the pajan, which is essentially torture until the elephant. It's like taming a wild stallion. You really have to break down their spirit until they become almost like zombies. And so whenever you see an elephant that is passive,
That doesn't kill you.
that doesn't try to kill you or run away, a wild elephant, their instinct is to run away. If they feel threatened, they will attack, right? This is a wild animal, and it's a big, strong, powerful wild animal.
I have a question, but what if you have bananas?
What if you have bananas?
Because
That's a live question.
I mean,
we were given bananas.
I mean, if it's a wild elephant, it doesn't care if you have bananas or not, because it's still either going to be afraid of you or it's going to want to attack you. In general, wild elephants don't attack humans. They understand that humans represent danger. And so when they see humans, they run away. This is normal. However, as humans, take elephants out of the wild and sell them into captivity, that elephant is essentially broken of its wild instincts through torture, through animal abuse. Now, there are elephants that are born in captivity and raised by hand by humans without ever being tortured, and they typically will exhibit tame traits around humans. Those are habituated elephants. They're elephants that were born in captivity, hand raised. So like a lot of zoos around the world breed elephants, keep them in good conditions, and raise them by hand by the zookeepers, and so the elephants are totally fine around people. But a lot of elephants in Southeast Asia are taken from the wild, which usually involves, plenty of the adults will be killed so that they can catch a young one when it's still young and less dangerous.
Sure.
Swimming with elephants so first of all, I'm not an elephant expert. I typically don't like any projects that profit off of keeping animals in captivity. However, a lot of that profit, if it's then turned around to put back into conservation, then I'm all for it. Especially if it's done in an ethical way. Essentially, the only thing I can say about swimming with elephants is it's dangerous because it's a wild animal and it can instinctively react. And I won't ask you to tell me which project you went with, but if you told me which project, I might have some different opinions. But you don't need to say it on camera.
I mean, I would if I remembered it, but it was in November.
Okay. Right.
We can look up.
There's a good project called Elephant Valley Project that has a rescue center in Mandakiri. They do not allow contact with the elephants and the tourists, and you can watch them swimming, but you cannot go swimming with them. So it reduces contact. But more importantly, they donate to WCS and the Forestry Administration's conservation project for wild elephant and wild elephant habitat there. So that's why I like those guys.
So, I mean, you're absolutely right. It did feel dangerous. And I was the elephant who was running away from the elephants, as in when I was getting there with my bananas and they were still 10 meters away walking towards me. I was like,
Enough, close enough.
put your hands up and walk the other way.
Elephants
Yeah, exactly.
are typically very gentle. However, you never know. It's a wild animal, and you have to respect them as such. Especially if you don't know the history of the elephant, if it's been abused, it might have some psychological issues that it's having to deal with that you just don't know about, and it can look perfectly fine 1 second and get aggressive the next.
And they have an elephant's memory, so they would remember that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh man.
I had to put that one in there. I'm sorry. I mean, guys, come on. It's 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. We've all had a wild working week. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks for that advice, but I genuinely.
It
as
was
you
a
said,
special experience.
It was no. I mean, I had this consideration of okay, are we going to give money to a place which is exploiting wild animals? But then they presented things in a way which was very convincing.
Oh, people are very good at presenting things in ways that are very convincing.
No.
That's not even. That's for sure.
But for example, I mean, the elephants. When you say in captivity, I mean, there were. What exactly is meant by that?
I mean, elephants that are owned by people, not wild elephants roaming free.
Yeah. Okay. I guess in that.
But there's also different levels of captivity. I mean, some places chain their elephants up and never unchain them. They're just permanently chained up. Other places chain them at night to make sure they don't run away and get hunted or fall into a poacher's trap.
Yeah.
Snare traps are a huge problem for elephants in Cambodia. Some people have small pens, some people have huge open forests where they can roam naturally. So captivity is a generic term to kind of describe all of these situations. It just means not wild.
I mean, the guys made it sound like, and of course, how can we check if it's true or not? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They made it sound like basically there's like, I don't know, 5 to 10 guardians like roaming around in the forest, looking after the elephants, making sure that everyone's still alive and kicking, and then they just get to live their lives named with human names. There was Princess, there was...
No names, no names, no
The
names.
elephants, not the
Yeah, but
company.
then we know which project it is because we know the names of the elephants in the different projects.
It was a cover-up name.
No, so for example, like there are elephant rescue centers in Cambodia who will rescue their elephants during peak tourist season. And then when the tourists go home, the elephants go back to work hauling illegal timber and just, being left in the village. Maybe treated wonderfully, but probably not. And then when the tourist season picks up again, they then rent those elephants to the center. So it's not even like, to me, that's not an elephant rescue center, that's a tourist trap. But they'll sell it as an elephant rescue center. There's dozens and dozens of elephant rescue centers in Cambodia. And only maybe 2 the ones that I can safely say are ethical and more importantly give back to conservation is Wildlife Alliance and Elephant Valley Project. So Wildlife Alliance runs the rescue center at Phnom Penh.
Right.
They have some elephants there, and the money that's raised not only from that but from all their various programs, that goes to support real conservation efforts. The same with Elephant Valley Project. They've actually donated to real elephant conservation in wild elephant habitat. And if you're an elephant rescue center without doing that, then to me, it's either a tourist trick or an animal welfare initiative, which is, if it's an animal welfare thing, that's fine. But for me as a conservationist, I'm more interested in using that awareness and that platform to raise funds and support for conservation of wild elephants and the habitats where they live. Because of course, by doing that, you're not only protecting the elephants, you're protecting everything down ecosystem from that. So
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that was
we
it.
really got distracted by elephants there.
But I did choose wisely. I knew it would get you going.
Oh god.
I could have said Angkor Wat.
Pretty easy.
I could have said Angkor Wat, and then I knew that they would be like, oh, nice.
Okay, yeah. Like
Next question.
Cool. Bram, you have any last questions you want to throw in?
Not really.
Do you have any questions for us?
What's going to happen to the nature center in the next 5 years?
Oh, in the next 5
What are
years.
your plans? Or rather, not the nature center itself, but the project
Do you have
that
an
we're
hour?
running.
Yeah, do you have one more hour? I'll
do.
give you the speed version. The speed version is, I hope within the next few years we are sustainable, because right now it's not a sustainable project. We're just losing money. So that's kind of the first objective, is get to the point where Fauna in Focus is sustainable. That we have donors covering our various programs, that we can find a sponsor for People Planet Podcast, so we can keep doing things like this more and more. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Those the things are literally falling off.
Yeah, literally, this is.
Everything is pulled by the
This-
Like, even the walls, if I push a bit too hard, it's going to collapse.
This whole nature center, that people come and they're usually pretty impressed by our nature
Of
center.
course.
It's all held together with duct tape and hot glue. So it is
It's
very
a
much a
movie
pilot.
set.
It's a set. Everything we've done so far has been a proof of concept. And so we're still looking for big donors and angel donors to kind of come in and go, wow, we like what you guys do. Here's $1 million to do it better. Because actually everything we've done is good, but it could be so much bigger and so much better. And so because we're such a small team with such a limited amount of funding, we're quite restricted in our reach. So right now we're focusing on quality over quantity, but I would like to get to the point where we can do quality and quantity, which would be great. So that's kind of our short-term goals, and then our longer-term goals is that this center would be, we would actually be able to either build or buy our own nature center. Right now we're just renting this house and we've converted it as a model. But what we'd love to do is find a little plot of land that we can turn into a nature reserve. We can restore some habitat there, plant some trees there to bring some of the bird life and the insect life back, and set up little nature trails, set up this whole interactive educational experience, but on a scale. There it goes. I knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen at some point
Did
during
it
this
have to happen when
podcast.
I was about to scratch my nose?
So yeah, so that's the kind of 5-year goal is to move to Nature Center 2.0.
Fantastic. Will that be in Siem Reap, do you think? Or are you going to move to the capital? Not a self-interested question.
I would like it to be in Siem Reap for a few reasons. One, Siem Reap is actually
In the heart of nature.
it's directly surrounded by 3 unique ecosystems, right? Like we've got the northern plains dry forest, just a few hours to the north. We've got Tonle Sap directly to the south, which literally like provides protein and sediment for something like 60-70% of the entire country. So critical ecosystem. We've got Phnom Kulen, the rainforest there, which are crucial. We've got, Anchorage Timor, the wetland area, which is crucial for Eld's deer, Drosera's crane. We've got the floodplains around the lake, which are critical habitat for Bengal florican, bird on the brink of extinction. So Siem Reap is it's a hotspot for access to nature and wildlife. Phnom Penh, there's some natural areas around it. Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got the Mekong River right there, but it's just harder to get out to nature from Phnom Penh, and by that it also means more time-consuming and more expensive. And so for us as a smaller NGO, we need it to be fairly accessible within a day. So we do nature discovery expeditions with our students, where after they go through our training workshops, which are quite intensive, it's over 20 hours of interactive classroom training. And after that program, we end by kind of celebrating the learning experience by going out into the field and putting some skills to the test. And so the fact that we can do these trips kind of as a day trip, we zip down to Prektal, we spend the whole day with bird conservation experts learning about their work, and it just becomes this easy day trip to do. So it's cheap, it's cost efficient, it's close by, so we don't have to worry about any overnight expeditions, which gets complicated if you have students. So for us, it practically, Siem Reap makes more sense. And then the second reason, there's actually 3 reasons. The second reason is Siem Reap is also the cultural heart of Cambodia. Right. So Phnom Penh might be the economic capital. Right. That's where all the funding is. That's where all the big NGOs are. But actually, culturally, Angkor is the heart of Cambodia. Absolutely. And so we want to be here. Southeast Asia, yeah. And also, I like Siem Reap better than Phnom Penh. So.
That's the third reason.
The third reason is Jungle Burger. Yeah.
I have one last question for you. It's a little bit more intricate, I suppose, but one of the biggest things I think that characterizes your work is that you're doing so much work for a demand that does not exist. There is no demand for nature conservation. There is no demand for wildlife club lessons per se. There is no demand in the country currently, in the audience that you're addressing, in the public, for the kinds of activities that you're doing. I think it's a very brave thing to initiate a project like this, knowing that you're kind of like fighting against the current. But I want to know, what does that really imply in your everyday planning activities?
So, first of all, we're a nonprofit. So I never intended this to be a profitable endeavor. And I actually don't think that it could be.
No, but it has to be sustainable.
Yeah, well, we definitely need to sort that out. But I don't think it will ever be profitable, and that wasn't ever really the intention. And when you're talking about supply and demand, you're really talking about profit. However, being a conservationist, I more think about an ecosystem. And when I look at an ecosystem, you look for niches, right? And so when I started in Cambodia, I saw an open niche. Right? I saw a gap in the ecosystem of Cambodia. Nobody was doing what we have set out to do. And to this day, we're still the only one that kind of really does it at this scope and scale. And that's what we're doing. We're not necessarily supplying a demand, we're filling a niche. That's how I like to see it. And so, for example, what this enables us to do is, when we go to find a new group of students to work with, essentially our sales pitch is, listen, if you want to sign up for a wildlife science lab where students get their hands on, here, toss me the skull.
Without breaking it into pieces. Literally toss.
Yeah, so you want to learn about the anatomy, like human skull anatomy, right? This is we have dozens and dozens of little custom-made materials that we can bring into our programs. We've got digital microscopes. We've got biofacts and samples that we've gathered from around Cambodia, and we've incorporated them into these media-based lessons in a way that really doesn't exist. And I was actually just discussing with Bram here how much time it takes us to develop one lesson. So we spend months designing 1 2-hour program. Even in a private school or a university, teachers, even if they have a good budget for their class, there's no way they're going to be able to develop custom materials for a 1-hour session, right? It's just not practical. It's so public schools, of course, but even in the private school sector, even in international schools, in universities, there's no way that the professor or the teacher would have the time and the budget and the support needed to put together the kind of programs that we do. So our programs would have an interactive PowerPoint that, as you go through it, is connecting with actual materials and biofacts and activities and games. We've got like a custom board game that we developed, so we learn about ecosystems. We've got, it's over 20 hours of materials and resources that all link up with these interactive, lessons with videos built in and everything. And that attention to crafting these unique learning experiences is what makes it special. And if it's special, it's unique and therefore hopefully appealing to have schools sign up. And so eventually the idea is that private schools, universities could basically buy these programs for their schools, and for each one that they buy, we then can go and do free ones for rural communities and public schools that don't have the budget for it. So we're already doing this actually. I would say we're aiming to reach about 500 students per year, which is about our current estimate. But again, that's 500 students who each go through the full program, so 20 hours of wildlife science training that is not only focusing on the knowledge, but also helping build the more positive attitude towards Cambodian nature and biodiversity. So for me, it's filling that niche, right? And of course, not only with the education programs, but with the films and with this center as well.
The films, I saw your movie on climate change.
This one, the new one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
It's fantastic.
So again, we look at what Cambodia has, and I don't want to duplicate efforts. Like, I have no interest in recreating the wheel. If somebody is doing X, then why do I need to do X? But nobody was making a Cambodian film on climate change, where it explained what it is, how does it happen, what is the impact on people, what's the impact on wildlife, and what can we do about it. So if nobody's going to do it, we do it. And this is kind of the philosophy that we've had for almost everything that we've done. When we set out to start the first film, this was the first film of its kind in Cambodia, like a very BBC style educational and inspirational story. Nobody had really made a film like that. Like, they were either super political, so then not many people saw them, or they were really negative, so it wasn't inspiring,
Or they're just terrible
or they were
quality.
really low quality. Yeah, and so we figured that we could change that.
Get the best out of both worlds and combine them.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
And then the same with the Wildlife Club program. We looked at the programs that were available from other organizations, and actually for us, a lot of the other conservation organizations in Cambodia were going out to their project sites in remote areas, and nobody was really working with urban communities. Definitely nobody thinks about, the poor private school students.
No.
Nobody says that. So if you're rich enough to send your kid to private school, nobody is like, we need the charity to come in and educate these kids about science. And yet, those are the people that are going to start businesses, that are going to go into policy making, that are going to be, teachers, leaders, community leaders, entrepreneurs. And so that's actually our first audience, is the urban communities, not only because they're in the best position to change their behavior. Like, you go to a local community and you say, hey, stop hunting. And he's like, but I need to feed my family. Yeah, well, unless you come with an alternative livelihood, this is a pointless endeavor.
Yeah.
So essentially what we're trying to do is address the issue of demand. So local communities and small-scale environmental impacts is not the big issue in Cambodia. It's, as you said, large-scale, agricultural conglomerates, buying up tracts of lands, land grabbing, economic lands concessions, mining, large-scale agroforestry. That's the pressing threat. And to address that, you need widespread public support at the higher levels of governance, of business, and of any country's economy. If we can build a general public that is aware and passionate and educated about the importance of conservation, it will eventually find its way down just by changing people's demand. So I hope, at least.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great work.
You as well. I'm looking forward to partnering up with Sipar on some books.
Me too.
We have a lot of ideas for print media, which you guys are the experts in, and digital media as well. But I think when it comes to putting together some field guides and graphic novels and like infographics, like we have this plan already, and I like duplicating. I like working together. I don't like duplicating efforts. So.
Sure.
Yeah, I think there's definitely potential between the two
Collaboration.
NGOs in the future,
Absolutely.
if you think we're up to it.
Oh yeah, I definitely do. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here, and that was a lovely chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming and talking on our
Pilot
People Planet podcast. So for you guys watching at home, we will have this episode available on our website. We'll have on our YouTube channel as well, and you'll also be able to download the audio version if you're looking for just the podcast version as well. Eventually, we'll have this podcast up on the various podcast platforms, but for now, we'll just have it on our website as well as on our YouTube channel. So go find it there, share it with your friends, and if you're interested in coming on the podcast to talk about something, let us know. We're always looking for people doing interesting things, and it can be English or Khmer, doesn't matter. In fact, we prefer Khmer, so if you are working for a conservation organization or a waste management organization or an education project, reach out to us and let us know, and we'd love to host you on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks so much for coming, Katerina, and thanks, Bob, for helping us with everything.
Sure.
And now it's time for dinner.
And I think now it's time for dinner. So thank you all for watching, and have a great day. Bye-bye.